August 7, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The dirt road shimmered under a sun that burned like vengeance. Ko's legs collapsed without warning. One moment she was walking. The next, she was screaming on the ground, her spine erupting in flames she couldn't see but felt in every nerve. Her friends circled her like a human shield, waiting for the gunshot they'd been promised would come. Instead, the American soldiers ran toward them. And in that single moment, everything these women had been taught about their enemy shattered like porcelain dropped on stone. If you're watching this story unfold and want to hear more incredible true accounts from World War II that challenge everything you thought you knew about courage, humanity, and survival, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Now let's return to that blazing road where 15 Japanese women discovered that the monsters they'd feared were more human than the leaders they trusted. And where Ko learned that sometimes survival means confronting the most dangerous truth of all. That you've been lied to about everything. The Battle of Saipan had ended 3 days earlier. 24,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead across an island barely 12 miles long. 3,000 American casualties littered the same blood-soaked ground. The island's northern cliffs still echoed with screams that would never fade from memory. Mothers clutching infants as they jumped. Families holding hands as they stepped into the void. Entire villages choosing death over dishonor. Japanese military propaganda had been relentless and specific. Americans would rape every woman they captured. They would torture prisoners for sport. They would feed Japanese bodies to their dogs like scraps of meat. Better death than surrender. Better suicide than shame. Better the cliff than the cage. But Ko and 14 other women hadn't jumped. They had chosen life even when their own culture called them cowards. They had chosen breath even when their officers beat them with rifle butts for refusing to die. For 3 days, they had walked without food or water under an August sun that showed no mercy. Their bodies were covered in bruises, but not from American hands. Their own soldiers had done this. Japanese officers who called them traitors and worse. Who told them they deserved whatever horror awaited them. Ko had been a nurse at the Japanese military hospital on Saipan. 23 years old, trained to save lives under imperial command. She had watched the propaganda work its dark magic on others. She had seen women sing the national anthem as they clutched grenades to their chests. She had watched families throw their children off cliffs rather than let them fall into American hands. The lies had taken root so deep that death seemed preferable to capture. But Ko had been too exhausted to die, too broken to find the courage for suicide. So she had surrendered, and 14 others had followed her lead. Now she lay on the dirt road, her spine on fire, her legs dead weight she couldn't control. She could see them lying there in the dust, but she couldn't feel them. Only pain. Only burning, unbearable pain that made her scream without meaning to. The American soldiers stopped. 2 young men with sunburned faces and nervous eyes. They carried rifles, but their expressions showed confusion, not cruelty. One called something into his radio, his voice urgent but not angry. The women waited for the shot that would end Ko's suffering. That's what they'd been told would happen. Enemy prisoners who couldn't walk were killed on the spot. Why waste resources on the wounded? Why show mercy to those who had shown none? But the shot never came. In the summer of 1944, the United States was producing war materials at a scale the world had never witnessed. Every 15 seconds, an American factory completed another aircraft. Every single day, American shipyards launched 3 new vessels into oceans that were slowly becoming American lakes. The medical infrastructure followed the same staggering pattern. Field hospitals sprang up within days of every invasion, equipped with blood plasma, penicillin, and surgical units that could operate while moving. Japan, by contrast, was starving. Its soldiers ate tree bark and insects when they could find them. Its civilians stood in line for rice mixed with sawdust, grateful even for that. Medical supplies had become so scarce that Japanese military hospitals often operated without anesthesia. Men biting leather straps while surgeons cut into their flesh. The contrast between American abundance and Japanese deprivation would become painfully clear to these 15 women in the hours ahead. Minutes later, an engine approached. A jeep skidded to a stop 20 feet away, dust rising in clouds. 2 men jumped out wearing different uniforms. White armbands marked with red crosses. Medics. The first was young with dark hair and a serious face that softened when he saw KO writhing in the dust. The second was older with gray temples and glasses that caught the sun like tiny mirrors. They walked quickly toward the group, and the women instinctively tightened their circle around KO. This was the moment. Whatever would happen now. But the young medic held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. He said something in English, his voice calm and steady. He pointed at KO, then at his medical bag, then made a gentle gesture of examining someone. His tone was careful, reassuring. The kind of voice you use with someone who's frightened and in pain. The women parted slowly, allowing him to approach. What choice did they have? The medic knelt beside KO on the dusty road. He opened his bag, revealing bandages, bottles, instruments that gleamed in the harsh sunlight. Then he did something that shocked every woman there. He smiled, not a cruel smile, not a mocking smile, a kind smile. The kind you give someone to tell them they're not alone. KO stared at him through her tears, confused and frightened. This wasn't the monster she'd been told about. This wasn't the demon from the propaganda posters that showed Americans as devils with fangs. The medic began his examination with practiced efficiency. He checked her pulse at her wrist, then at her neck. He looked into her eyes with a small flashlight. He asked questions in English, and though KO couldn't understand the words, she understood he was asking where it hurt. His hands moved carefully along her spine, gentle but professional. Even the slightest pressure made KO cry out, and each time she did, the medic's face showed genuine concern. Not irritation, not impatience, concern. The 2 medics had a quick, intense conversation. They used medical terms that meant nothing to the watching women, but their expressions told a story. This was serious. Very serious. The young medic pulled out a small bottle and a syringe. The women gasped. This was it. Poison to kill her quickly. But the medic showed KO the syringe, then pointed at her arm. He made an injection gesture, then a sleeping gesture. His meaning was clear. This will help with the pain. This will make you feel better. KO held out her arm, trembling. Within minutes, her face began to relax. The morphine was working. For the first time in hours, she wasn't crying. The pain was still there, but it was distant now, muffled like sound through water. The medic stayed beside her, checking her pulse, monitoring her response, speaking to her in that gentle English tone that said more than words ever could. Another vehicle arrived, an ambulance with a red cross painted on its side, the symbol massive and unmistakable. The back opened, and 2 more medics emerged with a stretcher. What happened next would stay with these women for the rest of their lives. The medics didn't throw KO onto the stretcher. They didn't drag her or handle her roughly like cargo. Instead, they worked with incredible care. The older medic explained something to the others, making gestures about KO's spine, about being careful. They positioned the stretcher beside her on the ground. Then, working together, they carefully rolled KO onto her side, supporting her head and keeping her spine straight. They slid a board under her back to keep her stable, then gently rolled her onto the stretcher. The whole process took several minutes. When KO cried out despite the morphine, they stopped. They waited until the pain passed before continuing. These were the same Americans the women had been told were savages. The same enemy who supposedly showed no mercy to Japanese prisoners. Yet here they were, treating KO with more care than she'd received from her own military in months. The medics lifted the stretcher carefully and carried it to the ambulance. They secured it on a special rack so it wouldn't slide or tip during transport. The young medic climbed in beside KO, still monitoring her condition. Before they closed the doors, he looked out at the group of women. He pointed at them, then at himself, then made a following gesture. "Come, you're coming too. You'll be with your friend." A transport truck pulled up behind the ambulance. The red-haired soldier who'd been escorting them gestured for the women to climb in. They looked at each other, uncertain. Was this real, or was this the beginning of something worse? Sachiko, a former teacher who'd worked in the military hospital, made the decision. She walked toward the truck and climbed in. One by one, the others followed. They sat on hard wooden benches, holding onto the canvas sides as the engine started. The small convoy began to move. Ambulance first, then the truck with the women, then a jeep with soldiers following behind. The women sat in stunned silence as the landscape changed. They passed destroyed tanks and bomb craters filled with rainwater. They passed warehouses made of gleaming metal, structures erected in days that would have taken Japan months. They saw stacks of supplies taller than houses, mountains of crates marked with English words they couldn't read. Trucks moved everywhere, carrying materials, soldiers, equipment. The scale of American resources was staggering. Everything the propaganda had told them about a weakened, collapsing America was clearly a lie. This wasn't a dying empire. This was a machine that could produce miracles. The convoy entered a large compound surrounded by a fence. A sign at the gate read Field Hospital, 31st Medical Battalion. Guards waved them through without hesitation. Inside, wounded American soldiers were being carried on stretchers from ambulances to large tents. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, shouting orders. The American flag snapped in the breeze from a tall pole in the center, stars and stripes rippling like water. The ambulance carrying KO pulled up to a tent marked with a red cross. Medics rushed out to meet it, their movements coordinated and swift. The truck with the women stopped nearby. Soldier gestured for them to get out. They climbed down carefully, staying close together, drawing strength from proximity. A young American nurse approached, her white uniform streaked with blood, exhaustion softened by kindness. She spoke English, then shifted to gestures when the women didn't understand, pointing to a nearby tent and motioning for them to wait. Inside, shaded from the brutal sun, the women sat on benches. The nurse returned with clean water in metal canteens. They drank slowly, almost afraid it wasn't real. Then she brought food: canned meat, crackers, chocolate, fruit. More food than they'd seen in months. Haku tried a cracker first, eyes widening at the taste of something real, not rotten or diluted. Others followed, some crying as they ate. The nurse watched with a sad smile before returning to the wounded soldiers. From the open flap, the women saw medics rush KO into the main tent. The hospital around them pulsed with ambulances, shouted orders, groans of pain, constant motion. Near midday, an older nurse arrived with hot soup and soft white bread. The warmth made several women weep. She introduced herself as Lieutenant Anderson and gently asked their names, treating them like human beings, not enemy prisoners. When Yuki asked about KO, Anderson explained by gesture, surgery, long, difficult, 10 hours. Later she returned, tired but not grim, showing with careful motions how doctors relieved pressure on KO's spine and repaired the damage. Then she made a hopeful face, a thumbs-up gesture. The surgery had gone well. The women clutched each other, relief flooding through them like water breaking through a dam. Yuki buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Others hugged each other. KO was alive. She had survived. The American doctors had saved her. 3 days passed. The women were moved to a different part of the compound, a section for civilian prisoners. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean and organized. They slept on cots with actual mattresses and blankets. They were given 3 meals a day at regular times. The food kept coming, reliable and abundant. They were given clean clothes, simple cotton dresses in various sizes, underwear, sandals that fit properly. They were allowed to shower in a facility with hot water and real soap. The soap smelled like flowers. Some of the women stood under the hot water for a long time, letting it wash away weeks of dirt, blood, and fear. Letting it wash away the propaganda that had told them they would be monsters if they survived. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Anderson came with news. Ko could have visitors. Yuki and Sachiko went with the nurse to the recovery tent. Ko lay in a bed with clean white sheets. Her head rested on a pillow. She was awake, though she looked pale and exhausted. When she saw her friends, tears filled her eyes. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." Yuki rushed to her side, taking her hand carefully. "We're here. We're all safe. How do you feel?" Ko smiled weakly. "Tired, confused. They fixed my back. The American doctors, they did surgery on my spine." She looked down at her legs under the thin blanket. "I can feel them again. I can wiggle my toes." Sachiko felt tears rise as Ko whispered in disbelief. "They're treating me the same as their own." Around them lay wounded American soldiers, all receiving identical care. The women had been taught Americans were monsters who viewed Japanese lives as worthless, that surrender meant torture and death. Yet on a dusty Saipan road, U.S. medics had done the opposite, giving morphine, performing surgery, offering clean sheets and gentle voices. Propaganda had promised cruelty. Reality delivered compassion. Across the Pacific in 1944, countless Japanese soldiers and civilians faced the same shock. Capture meant food, bandages, and humanity. Their own leaders had denied them. The dissonance was shattering. How do you reconcile years of fear with the kindness of supposed enemies? Repatriation brought the women back to Japan in late 1944, where some faced suspicion for having survived. Ko wrote everything down: the collapse, the dust, the medic's hands, the surgery that saved her spine, afraid the truth might fade. Decades later, she told her grandchildren the dangerous lesson she learned that summer. Decency can cut through any lie. The 15 women of Saipan carried that truth forever. Proof that humanity can outlive even the darkest wars and the harshest propaganda.